Days before 6 people were murdered on a remote Bavarian farm, the owner reportedly discovered footprints leading from the forest toward his home. None appeared to lead away. A house key had vanished. Strange noises were heard above the living quarters. Then the entire family and a newly arrived maid were killed. But the most disturbing clue came afterward. Someone appeared to remain at the farm, feeding the animals and using the house while the victims lay undiscovered. More than a century later, no one has been convicted. In 1922, Hinterkaifeck was not a village. It was a solitary farmstead near the Bavarian community of Gruber, approximately 70 kilometers north of Munich. The property stood apart from its neighbors. Fields surrounded it, woodland lay nearby. The farm buildings and living quarters were joined together, creating a place where a person could move between the house, barn, stable, and attic without immediately being seen from outside. 6 people were living there by the end of March. 63-year-old farmer Andreas Gruber, his 72-year-old wife Cäzilia, their widowed daughter Viktoria Gabriel, aged 35, Victoria's 7-year-old daughter, also named Cäzilia, her 2-year-old son Josef, and Maria Baumgartner, a 44-year-old maid who arrived on the very day the family was killed. The farm appeared quiet. But during the days before the murders, Andreas reportedly described a sequence of unexplained incidents. Each one seemed small. Together they created the impression that someone was watching the property from much closer than anyone understood. According to later accounts, Andreas discovered footprints in snow leading from the forest toward the farm. He reportedly could not find a matching trail returning in the opposite direction. The story has become one of the case's most famous details, but it must be handled carefully. The footprints were not preserved for modern forensic examination. No photographs or casts allowed later investigators to establish who made them, when they appeared, or whether the returning tracks had simply been obscured. The detail survives through historical witness accounts rather than physical evidence available today. Still, Andreas apparently found the marks unusual enough to mention them. A stranger may have approached the property, a neighbor may have crossed the land, or the tracks may have belonged to someone who entered the farm and left by another route. No conclusive evidence confirmed any explanation. Then another object appeared, a newspaper that the household had not purchased. A key to the property was reportedly missing. That fact becomes significant only when combined with what came next. If someone possessed a key, they might have entered without forcing a door. If the key was simply misplaced, it meant nothing. The investigation never proved that the missing key was used by the killer. But after the murders, police found no obvious evidence of a chaotic break-in. The possibility emerged that the offender was familiar with the farm. They may have known its rooms, its doors, its routines, and where tools were stored. That theory would later influence how investigators evaluated neighbors, relatives, laborers, and people who had worked on the property. But before anyone died, Andreas reported another disturbance. Footsteps above the family, inside the attic. The attic extended over parts of the farmhouse and barn. Andreas reportedly heard footsteps there. He searched, but apparently found no one. Stories later claimed that disturbed straw or signs of occupancy were found above the living quarters. However, not every dramatic detail repeated online can be verified with equal confidence. The surviving historical record supports concerns about unexplained noises and suspicious activity, but it does not establish that an unknown person was definitively living in the attic. That remains a theory. The previous maid had left months earlier. Accounts say she believed the farm was haunted after hearing unusual noises. The family apparently did not abandon the property, nor did Andreas immediately involve police. According to later reports, a neighbor offered him a firearm, but he declined. That decision has become another source of speculation. Did Andreas believe the disturbance was harmless? Did he suspect someone he knew? Or was the danger less obvious at the time than it appears in hindsight? The answer disappeared with him. The Gruber household was not free from scandal. Historical records show that Andreas Gruber and his daughter Viktoria had previously been convicted of an incestuous relationship. The paternity of Viktoria's young son Josef became the subject of dispute and local suspicion. Neighbor Lorenz Schlittenbauer had once been involved with Viktoria and had acknowledged paternity before later questioning it. These circumstances created possible motives involving shame, money, jealousy, control, and family conflict. But a troubling personal history does not identify a killer, nor does it justify turning every rumor into evidence. The case attracted gossip almost immediately because the victims were unable to answer accusations about their private lives. Investigators would later examine Schlittenbauer closely. They would also consider relatives, traveling criminals, former workers, and even the possibility that Viktoria's supposedly deceased husband had returned. None of those theories produced a conviction. On Friday, March 31st, 1922, Maria Baumgartner came to Hinterkaifeck to begin work. She was reportedly accompanied to the farm by a family member. It was her first day there. Within hours, she would be dead. The timing rules out the idea that Maria had participated in weeks of household conflict. She entered the story at its final moment. Her presence also complicates the killer's plan. If the offender expected only the family, the arrival of a new maid created an additional witness. Yet the attack still went forward. That suggests either the killer adapted quickly or knew she was coming. No evidence conclusively resolves which. As evening approached, 4 members of the family somehow entered the barn. Investigators later believed they were killed there, one after another, but no witness survived to explain how they were drawn inside. The bodies of Andreas, his wife Cäzilia, Viktoria, and 7-year-old Cäzilia were found in the barn area. Maria and 2-year-old Josef were killed inside the living quarters. The weapon was identified as a farm mattock or grub axe belonging to the property. It was later recovered hidden above the crime scene. The arrangement has led investigators and researchers to believe the killer may have lured or confronted the 4 older victims separately in the barn. If correct, the offender controlled the sequence. That would require patience, confidence, and knowledge that the others would come looking. The precise order remains uncertain. So does the reason they entered. Perhaps an animal was making noise, perhaps one family member called another. Perhaps the killer deliberately created a disturbance. There is no surviving testimony. Only the final positions of the victims. By midnight, 6 people were dead. The farmhouse was silent. No alarm had been raised. And if investigators were correct about what happened next, the killer did not run. Smoke would continue rising from the chimney. The animals would remain fed, and someone would move through the property as though the farm now belonged to them. The family failed to appear for Sunday worship. Young Cäzilia did not attend school. Mail accumulated. Neighbors noticed that the farm seemed strangely quiet. But the chimney reportedly smoked. The livestock appeared to have been cared for. A traveling craftsman later said he saw signs of activity at the property. These reports supported the belief that someone remained at Hinterkaifeck after the murders. However, the exact duration and identity of that person remain uncertain. The phrase "the killer lived with the bodies" is frequently repeated as fact. The more precise conclusion is this: evidence suggested that someone fed the animals, used food, and maintained activity at the farm after the victims were killed. Investigators believe that person may have been the murderer. No witness conclusively established it. That distinction does not make the case less disturbing. It makes the uncertainty more honest. On April 4th, neighbors arrived to investigate. Among them was Lorenz Schlittenbauer. The searchers entered the barn and discovered the first bodies. They then moved into the house, where they found Maria Baumgartner and little Josef. The crime scene should have been sealed immediately. Instead, several people moved through it. Bodies were touched or shifted. Neighbors entered rooms. Animals still required attention. This contamination damaged the investigation before trained officers arrived. Early 20th century police work already used fingerprinting in many cases, but no complete modern-style forensic preservation occurred at Hinterkaifeck. Later, reviews criticized the failure to collect fingerprints and the limited handling of physical evidence. The killer had already received the advantage of 4 undisturbed days. Now the investigation lost more evidence. Investigators found no evidence that the farm had been emptied of valuables. Money remained. This weakened a simple robbery theory. The killer had used a weapon found on the property, suggesting familiarity or opportunity. The bodies in the barn had been partly covered. That action has generated conflicting interpretations, including remorse, concealment, practical movement through the barn, or a desire not to see the victims. No single explanation can be proven. The youngest victim, Josef, and the maid were killed in separate rooms. That indicates the offender searched or moved through the living quarters after the barn attack. Investigators also concluded that 7-year-old Cäzilia may have survived for some time after being injured. She could not tell investigators what she had seen. Lorenz Schlittenbauer quickly became one of the most discussed suspects. He had a personal history with Viktoria. He had disputed Josef's paternity, he knew the farm, and his actions during the discovery raised suspicion. Some witnesses later claimed he entered parts of the house alone or behaved as if he understood the property unusually well. Stories developed that he moved through a locked door without difficulty, suggesting he possessed the missing key. But surviving accounts differ. No physical evidence established that he had the key, no witness saw him commit the murders, and police never obtained enough evidence to charge him. He denied responsibility for the rest of his life and pursued legal action against people who accused him. The suspicion remains historically important. It is not a conviction. Victoria's husband, Carl Gabriel, had been reported killed during the First World War. His body was not conclusively identified in a way that ended every rumor. After the murders, some people speculated that he had survived and returned secretly, but no reliable evidence placed Carl at Hinterkaifeck in 1922. Military records and witness accounts supported his wartime death. The theory survives because it offers a dramatic hidden figure, but narrative power is not proof. Investigators also examined brothers Anton and Karl Bichler, who had connections to the area and possible familiarity with the farm. More than 100 people reportedly came under suspicion or investigation over the decades. No suspect was tied to the crime through fingerprints, blood evidence, deoxyribonucleic acid, a reliable eyewitness, or a verified confession. In 2007, police academy students in Fürstenfeldbruck re-examined the case using modern investigative principles. Their report criticized the lack of systematic forensic preservation. The students reportedly reached a common view about a likely perpetrator, but did not publicly name that person, partly out of consideration for living descendants. They also acknowledged that the surviving evidence could not support a modern prosecution. This review is often described online as having solved the case. It did not. It produced a reasoned suspect assessment. Without a trial, tested evidence, or public proof, the Hinterkaifeck murders remain officially unresolved. Modern investigators could reconstruct the failures. They could identify the strongest suspect, but they could not replace what had been lost. No preserved bodies, no uncontaminated fingerprints, no deoxyribonucleic acid profile. and no witness who could describe the killer. 6 people were murdered at Hinterkaifeck during the night of March 31st, 1922. 4 were found in the barn, 2 were found inside the house. A mattock belonging to the farm was identified as the weapon. Money and valuables remained, making ordinary robbery less convincing. No one was convicted. The case remains one of Germany's most famous unsolved multiple homicides. The offender probably knew the farm, using the household's own weapon, controlling several victims, moving through connected buildings and remaining nearby all suggest familiarity. The murders may have been personal. The killer appeared willing to kill children and a maid, which may indicate a desire to eliminate every witness. A known person fits many aspects of the crime. They might approach without alarming the victims. They could know where the mattock was stored. They might understand how to draw family members into the barn. Lorenz Schlittenbauer remains the most commonly discussed individual within this theory. But the surviving record does not establish his guilt. A responsible account cannot turn suspicion into certainty simply because a theory feels complete. A stranger may have entered the property secretly and remained undetected. This theory explains the footsteps, missing key, and footprints, but it creates other questions. How did the stranger know the family's movements? Why choose that farm? Why leave money untouched? Why remain after committing 6 murders? No evidence conclusively confirms either profile. The most important evidence was lost. The bodies cannot be tested. The murder weapon cannot yield a reliable modern profile after decades of handling. The original crime scene no longer exists. Witnesses are dead, memories changed, rumors entered later retellings. A confession hidden in a private letter could still emerge. A forgotten archive might clarify a witness statement. But biological proof is unlikely. Was someone living inside the Hinterkaifeck farm? Possibly. The family reported signs that someone may have entered or moved around the property. But no conclusive evidence proved that an intruder had secretly occupied the attic. What is more strongly supported is that the murderer knew how the farm worked. The killer controlled the victims, used a tool from the property, moved through the buildings, and may have remained after the attack. Those actions suggest confidence and familiarity. They do not tell us whether that familiarity belonged to a neighbor, relative, former worker, secret occupant, or someone whose name has been forgotten. The case endures because its most frightening details seem to point toward an answer: footprints, footsteps, a missing key, a stranger's newspaper, smoke after death, animals that did not go hungry. Each clue feels meaningful, but none is strong enough to carry the case alone. Perhaps the killer was never a mysterious stranger watching from the attic. Perhaps the family opened the door to someone they knew. Or perhaps the danger really had been above them, moving quietly through the beams while they slept. More than 100 years later, Hinterkaifeck remains silent. The farm is gone. The victims are buried. And the person who understood exactly what happened that night was never forced to explain it. What do you believe really happened? Do you think the killer had been hiding inside the property? Or was the murderer someone the family already knew and trusted? Which clue do you consider most important? The missing key, the attic noises, the footprints, the family conflict, or the activity after the murders? Share your theory in the comments. If you found this investigation worthwhile, please subscribe to Mysterious Crime, like this video, share it with someone who loves documentaries, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next investigation. Every mystery has a story.